Welcome everyone to Eco Answers with an ELA Eco Pro. Each month, ELA members can join in via the free Google Meet platform to ask questions and get professional advice from the experts. Check out the ELA website for more information about upcoming discussion topics and how to register. Tonight's Q&A discussion topic is Living Shorelines, led by one of North America's leading experts in protecting priceless coastline properties from erosion. Rosmarie Lohnes is the founder and CEO of Helping Nature Heal Incorporated, an award-winning ecological landscaping company celebrating 20 years in business based in Nova Scotia. If you'd like to find out more about her, please check out the description for this session on the ELA website. Because the session runs for about 45 minutes, I'd like to hand it off to Rosmarie as soon as possible so we can jump right in. But a quick reminder to our audience, especially those just joining in, to please keep yourself on mute unless you have a question. And remember that you are on camera and this session is being recorded. If you have a question, please raise your virtual hand with Google Meet. I will call on you, and please do not use the chat for questions. Thank you and welcome, Rosmarie.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here. It's really quite a pleasure to chat with you all and get a chance to answer your questions and get to know you better. I have a quick PowerPoint to start off our night and get some core information into you so that we can direct questions and the conversation. And if I don't have the answer right off the top of my tongue here tonight, I will respond later by email or once I chat with my team back here in the office, and we'll get a good answer for you. So I just wanted to kind of let you know if you had other questions that come up after the event as well, just feel free to email us. Okay, so I'm going to set up my share screen. Okay. All right, so can everyone see that? Maybe just let me, yep, okay. All right, that's great. So I can't see you anymore. So yeah, if you have questions, please just chime in with Willow, okay? That's great. So we've been fortunate enough over these 20 years to really be involved in some great promotion and some really great organizations, collaborations with associations like yourselves, as well as the Coastal Zone Canada and various other organizations, and really humbled and honored to be featured by some of these award organizations as well. And really happy to share that with you, and that, we are looking forward to a bright future with the ecological sense of how do we manage these shorelines going through our climate changes as we have. So that's just a quick little snippet of information about some of the things that we've won and done. And if you want further info on those things, we can certainly send that off to you. So the main thing that we want to talk about tonight is the erosional processes, of course. And so on this photo, you can see there's a very defined line, right and left-hand side of that line. You can see from brush wall, brush matting, plants growing on one side, interacting with the rocks at the bottom, and really kind of keeping things stable. And on the right-hand side is an eroding cliff. It's the neighbor side. So there's two properties there. And as you can see, the houses are rather close to the shore. And we notice this a lot, of course. People's investments are being put into risk. And so the big topic is to think about erosion as this natural process that it is. We need these sands and the displacement of these materials so that we can build sand dunes and estuaries and beaches and, have our beautiful coastline and make that really safe and usable. And so when we're watching this erosion happen, of course, our instinct is to make that stop. And we have to realize that as a natural process, kind of like gravity, we can't really stop it in this realm. And so we can slow things down. We can certainly buy ourselves a bit more time, but we have to be fully aware that this process is something that is continuing, should continue, and that we probably shouldn't be thinking about stopping it in general, because we would starve out these other spaces that we love to live nearby and to make use of. So we want to keep thinking about this dynamic process that the shoreline is in. It is a moving thing, a living entity, and then we plunk our, solid homes and septic fields right in the middle of this process and expect everything to slow down and stop for us. And of course, we can't do that. So part of the thing about living on the shore then is, how do we live here and buy ourselves some time, be able to look at the processes through a new lens, through a new sense, and design and develop a ecosystem styled managed landscape that can grow into a really beautiful blooming space like it is in this photograph here. And how do we manifest that to go from an open cliff, open soil system to something that's really growing and maturing in place? And so we want to think about, what are these spaces up against, right? So what kind of storm surge are they having? Is there, rapid freeze thaw cycles happening in your district? How do the seasons change, and what does that mean for the environment around your living shoreline? And then, of course, we want to think about the makeup of the landscape, just like you would in a horizontal surface, although this is a sloped one. So soil type, soil retention, the texture of the soils, the bedrock, the parent material within the soil system. How do all of these impact what kind of plants will be able to do some good work for us? And when I say the work of the plants, it's really about having those root systems intermingling with the boulders and the bigger root systems of the more mature plants, knitting that shoreline together so that it doesn't move as quickly as it would if it was open soil. So we build this self-sustaining system that serves the animals, serves the humans, serves the nature around it. We know that when the animals move back in, we feel like we've had some success there. Because these open slopes, as you can see on the left-hand side of this slide, really barren, traditional sort of engineering style materials there being used, and high expense engineered stamped design on this one, and within a couple winters completely destroyed. And homeowners have a house just above this big slope, of course, and this is pretty devastating to be able to think that you can stop something, pay a lot of money to do that, hire a lot of professionals to make that work for you, and then realize that there is no stopping Mother Nature, and have to backtrack and think about some different options. So this slope now looks like this. Obviously, there's still work to be done at the toe of the slope, where the water impacts the toe and then does some damage to that space. So there's some rocks in there, there's some heavier structures down there still, and they're working amongst the plant material in order to help knit that coastline back together. And so there's a fall picture, and then goldenrod, aster, September picture in there. Isn't that pretty? Yeah. So this is what we would call a hybrid. This is the beginning stages of a hybrid slope. And you can see we've got hay scattered, some brush, and some work to be done yet, growing this back into place. This rock wall, unfortunately, was sort of built in an old-fashioned style without drainage rock in between or behind it, no geotextile. It was sort of an old-fashioned kind of style company that put that together. And so now we're constantly dealing with the water going up onto the slope and pushing the soils out through the belly of the wall. And so we're using our vegetated rock wall system to work on that. And I can share some pictures in a later date or in a follow-up email with you about how that project specifically is going. But yeah, this is one that we're big working on there. So that's the end of our slideshow. I didn't want to take too many minutes out of our time frame for that. So I'm going to just shut this screen down, and yeah, and we'll just go back to our main screen, and we can open up the floor for some questions. I know we did have one that came in by email, if we wanted to start with that one, maybe.
Yep, I was just going to say, so that one, Anna Cheng, in your restorations, how do you use and advise about regenerative agriculture and rebuilding soils with their native life cycle biomes like the soil food web?
Yeah, thanks. That's such a great question, because everything is about the soil, right? I often say that we're not in the green industry, we're brown. For us, it's all about the soil beneath our feet and how the plants and the humans are interacting with that soil. What are we landing on top of it? Is there structure within it, like wells and septic systems and foundations of our homes? And so these soils are constantly under attack by our human needs and wants to live in the land and on the land. So whenever we're rebuilding an ecosystem style landscape, whether it's on a horizontal plane or on the shoreline, the same kind of thing is happening. It's just on a vertical surface instead of horizontally. So we believe in building the soil infrastructure and repairing the capacity for the soil to live on its own. So what we do is frame up our landscapes with logs and decomposing coarse woody debris. That could be an old root system, or especially in new developments when they're cutting down the trees and ripping out the root systems to put in the home or the driveway or whatever is needed. I get them to save all that stuff and then we work it back into the landscape. And so these root systems, that are being plucked out of the land get to sit back on top of it. And then we put debris and materials, rocks and hay bales and things all around it and build it back into the landscape. So the infrastructure of our landscapes in this context is all about decomposing wood and layers of soils with leaf litter, manures, seaweeds, more layers of soil until we get to the right depth that we need to support those plants. In our business, we don't dig the earth, we build berms. And so we use those hugelkultur techniques of layers of logs and materials in more of a berm style rather than being so vertical like traditional hugelkultur. It's more lumpy and bumpy like a forest floor. And of course, we mulch heavily. We created our own fertilizer. We call it Abundance. And it is made with locally derived seaweed and mycorrhizal fungi and beneficial bacteria. So it's like a soil inoculant. It kind of kickstarts the soil food web. And as it's watered in, it actually starts to vibrate at a new frequency because it's moist and it's inside the soil horizon, and it calls out to the other mycorrhizae and the other filament networks around it and draws them back in. And then these layers help to feed the soil food web as the critters move up to the surface and start eating up our debris and our seaweeds and mulches. And the animals actually do the cycling of the material for us. So we try to think of it as being as lazy construction workers as possible, right? I mean, it's a heavy work and heavy logs and heaps and piles of hay bales and seaweed and things. It's not being lazy at all. But once we put the infrastructure together, we can let the system do the work. So then there's pockets of soil that have the plants in them. And then around them are these sort of hugelkultur beds that connect it all together. And we know from Suzanne Simard's book, Finding the Mother Tree, and forest therapy books, that the vibrations of us working on the land, of us putting our blood, sweat, and tears into it, that the animals watching us and witnessing us, the plants getting this nourishment that they hadn't had before, all of that connects it so that it becomes a relationship, and that it's more of a pleasure to build these things and enact life again where there was wounds. So that soil food web is so important. And I'm so glad you asked the question. It's really vital that we think about that really as our primary goal, because then everything takes care of itself and we can really step away and just let it grow, and we don't have to be tending and messing with weeds and all kinds of other things because we've built the health into it. Mm-hmm.
So I will ask Rosmarie, I know that something you've been working on is building this into a business model. For the professionals here who are here today, who might have clients that could benefit from this, who may be just starting out, do you have advice for them? Do you have suggestions? Do you have lessons learned that you could share about that?
Sure, definitely. I mean, lessons learned for sure. Lots of those in the last, we started in 2001. So, as we matured as humans, I was only 30 at the time. What did I know about running a big business or anything like that? It really had to start off very slowly and organically, and grew as I grew and as my needs changed and as the clientele's landscapes changed. As soon as Hurricane Juan hit in 2003 and then White Juan in 2004, right away, people started seeing erosion. And all of a sudden they're looking to me as their landscaper, as their land caretaker, as the steward of their acreage or whatnot. What do we do about this thing called erosion, right? All of a sudden we realized, and I remember watching the news and looking at the weather reports and things and going, oh my God, I learned about this in university, right? This crazy jet stream that goes really wiggly like that, and these tornadoes and cyclones and hurricanes. And I was like, holy crap, here it is, it's happening. I know all this stuff. Like, I can put this together and sell this as something. And really looking at what were the new needs of our clientele. My husband was lawn mowing for me. We had some teenagers, raking and doing these kind of traditional landscaping. And right away, it was like, you got to be different. You can't be competing with lawnmowers if you really want to enact the science. That's just distracting, and it dilutes your ethical, moral conviction to be an environmentalist and to, save the planet, So we had to ditch the lawn mowing team, and we had to really take the maintenance into a stewardship role. So we have a steward who runs the maintenance sector of the landscaping. And then, I had to really move into my design and CEO role of, connecting with NGOs and towns and municipalities and letting them know that I had these services that were for sale, that I could bring the nature back to life in certain ways, in certain areas, these kind of dead zones in our towns or the shoreline itself. Or we are lucky enough to live on a river system here that floods a lot and has a lot of development along it. So there's always sediment and things floating in the river, and trying to re-engage that river and help people, see the potential of these landscapes as food sources. Food was really an easy entry point to convince people to stop mowing and plant food, right? Instead of having these trees in the lawn with, 2 shrubs over here and something over here, it was like, let's plant some fruit trees. Let's get some nut trees going. Let's start eating this landscape a bit more and being more self-sufficient. And as the economy kind of changed around 2008, the and the crash and everything, and different political genres moving in, and science being squandered and all of that. It's like, we have our own backyards. It may be the only thing that is sacred anymore in this world. Let's start using them more purposefully and with a new sense of stewardship instead of dominance, right? It was like this, we need a paradigm shift. And so if we're the frontline people to do that, then we just got to keep talking about it and sharing and engaging the neighbors and putting, cool little flyers in people's mailboxes and things so that they know you're working in the neighborhood, and just really speaking out about what you know and what you understand about the land. Like, I think to be an ecological landscaper right now is so poignant and so at a perfect moment in time, especially if you're just starting out, because the marketing's being done for you. Every day at 6 o'clock when people watch the news, they're seeing a mudslide, beach erosion, all kinds of things happening. You just have to stand up and say, hey, I know something that I can help you. And people will come running. We're running this from $0 to $1 million business. And it feels extraordinary that, like, I pinch myself every morning, like, oh my gosh, like, I get to do these repair jobs and rebuild nature and plant thousands of plants instead of 12 little rose bushes. It's like incredible.
Wonderful. Margaret has a question. Margaret, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Okay. Well, I live on a river in Georgia, and I live on the cut bank of the river, and we moved here 4 years ago, and the house is a fixer-upper, so we've been spending most of our time dealing with the house issues, and now we're going after the yard. And most of what's on the river batcher is invasive plants, of course, but one of my friends is, oh, you have to rip all of that out. I'm like, it's holding the soil. I can't pull out what's holding the soil down unless I have something to replace it. But because every time we have a heavy rain, the speed of the river gets ridiculous, and it scours our side of the river. My neighbor cut down a dead eastern red cedar, and I was like, yay, and I ran over there, my little tractor, and I loaded up the logs, and we put them down there, and we piled some other debris on top of it, and the next heavy rain, boop, they went floating down the river. So, okay, so you put in logs, a root system. How do you hold this stuff down? I mean, wood floats. How do you keep all of this stuff that you're building up in your berm from just floating away? Because we don't just have spring floods. It's every rain. All of the street runoff is sent into our river in our county.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Margaret. It is a very common question, especially on fast-moving river systems, for sure. And it's tricky. It's definitely tricky. We do a thing that is called an erosion chevron, and it's a sort of a triangular-shaped 2 logs. So if this is a log and one, and it's connected at the tip, we usually leave a little leak spot about 4 inches open. And we stake it 2 on the bottom side and 1 on the top. And then we tie them off so that it's kind of lashed together and crisscrossed. And so these are usually we put them above what we would say the storm surge line. So they're not interacting with the water on a daily basis. And then we plant the heck out of them. So this becomes sort of this is an entrapment. So as sediment is moving downhill, it traps it in there, and it gives you about 8 inches that you can, make a trough in that triangular space, and you can lay your root systems down in there as you move up the chevron. The plants don't need to be straight down, although if you can dig in there, that is helpful. but often, a bowl just kind of scraped out along the ridge of the log. And then if you lay your root systems in there and kind of smoosh them into the ground, cover them, of course, with some good soil. We also do, so the staking of the logs is really key. We also use brush matting, and we weave it. So underneath the chevron is a piece, and then we weave into it in multiple directions. So it's like a tight woven quilt laying over top of soil. Between the weave, in that hole there, we would plug in some either live staking or some plug size grasses that can live in the watery wet zone. So you would just kind of plug it all together. That way, when the water, that too is also staked, but it's woven quite tightly. And if you wanted to send me an email, I can give you some sketches of those structures if you like. The other thing about the invasive species part is that, of course, we don't want them to take over the spaces where our native plants should be. But you're correct that the root systems are doing some work. And, it's not the plant's fault that it's there, right? So we try to kind of see the plant as, okay, where's the opportunity lie? So I really just keep trimming them and cutting them down. If it's something like Japanese knotweed, grows back super fast, that stems are really good fibers. And I have not seen them sprout from the fibers, unlike maybe goutweed or mint, one of those.
Japanese wisteria and privet.
Wisteria and privet, yeah. So really great root systems on both of those, right? Long and stringy, and really knitting into that soil horizon. So what I tend to do is have a really great pair of shears, and I'll shear down some of these invasives so that they're not taking light and space away from my native plants. And I plant more natives in the chevrons and in the gaps and wherever I can find space for them. And then I control the natives by trimming them with shears. Sometimes if you have to, use a whippersnipper, but just kind of controlling their rate of growth by eliminating photosynthesis as much as you can. And and I tend to not dig them out unless they're creeping too close to piping or, something that's some kind of infrastructure like a septic field or things like that. And I just manage them. Just look at the opportunity to manage that plant in a way that you can keep control of it and you can keep track of it, and then plant like heck around it, so that you use up all the individual spaces with other things. Yeah.
That sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Any other questions? I will offer one. It's sort of two parts of the same question. So one is, are you accommodating migrating plants as the climate is changing, as it's getting warmer, as we're going up towards Nova Scotia? Are you finding that the plant palette you're using is changing, or are you sort of trying to get ahead of the curve and use those? And secondly, it's sort of how much you use existing materials. So you had an example, I saw the one of the goldenrod and everything. Goldenrod may have been there a little bit dormant. Do you accommodate for that when you're doing your planning and try and do an inventory of what's existing to minimize disturbance, or do you just kind of try and start fresh? Of course, the answer is probably it depends, but I'd love to hear your thought on that.
For sure. Thanks for asking. The migrating plant question is so interesting, right? I mean, humans are migrating all the time to different countries, different areas, and it's okay. But as soon as the plants do that, we kind of freak out a little bit. So I think someone told me once, the lines on the countries are just drawn by humans, right? Like the plants don't know the lines exist, and they're moving with water, big mudslides are taking out all kinds of plants, entering into oceans and river systems, and those plants are moving thousands of kilometers away. And so, I try to think about what can this plant offer to humanity? The Japanese knotweed is a really good tincture made by some of our indigenous folks here, and is the cure for Lyme's disease. So, it's edible, and it has some really cool fibrous roots, and, like it's not that the plant itself is evil. We've kind of labeled it that way, and we've mistreated it perhaps in some cases. So I try to keep an open mind about these plants. And if it's something like that, that's pretty aggressive, like Hedra helix, an ivy, or, I don't know, whichever vine is taking over, what can I do with that thing? Can I make wreaths out of it? Can I burn it in a biomass burner somewhere? Can I, where's an opportunity? And so if challenge and opportunity are the same coin, right? You just kind of flip it over. 1 minute it's a good, 1 minute it's a bad. So a lot of our medicinal people here tell me things like, just tell the plant that you don't need it here anymore. Just ask it to go away. Just work with it. Learn its root systems. Be careful with taking them out, and keep a consistency plan for that. Shearing it. Don't let it go to seed anymore. Starve it out kind of thing. But keep what's good for you. Keep them, you get this anthropocentric kind of way of looking at the landscape of, well, we're living here together, so I have rights too, just like the plants do. And so if I want to eat that plant or use it for medicine or some craft, then that's me finding purpose with this plant. And maybe the plant needs to be trimmed or, used in that way. So can we have a relationship instead of fighting each other? And I think when we change the mindset around invasives, with air quotes, it kind of gives plants there's a new conversation to have about the plants and with them and understanding them. And maybe, you eat it, or you make something out of it instead. So where's the opportunity?
And how about migrating native plants?
So the migrating plants coming up from the south. So we're in the Acadian forest system here in Nova Scotia. So we're partly the Carolinian forest and the boreal forest kind of collided and created this really interesting, unique space. And so we do have plants from that Carolinian zone, as well as from Northern Ontario, so it's very interesting to see. And we noticed about 10 years ago that we could start growing nut trees here on the south shore of Nova Scotia, where we're way more exposed to the environment. We're kind of hanging out, the Atlantic coast is minutes away from my home. So we get all of these effects of the climate. And one of the good things is this more temperate, loving, warm, moist climate that we have. I mean, it makes for really wicked rainstorms and lots of snow sometimes, but on the good side of that, it means we can grow almond trees and pecans and persimmons and all kinds of lovely fruits that we wouldn't have access to. And we do see some of the roses moving up, and certainly a lot of the perennials are coming this direction. And it's sort of, well, do we accept them? Do we make room for them? Do we start to learn more about them and use them in a new way? Or do we just, relate to them and enjoy what they have to offer as far as an aesthetic thing? When we look at the landscape, initially, we do a site survey and we do catalog as much as possible what's growing there. And we take soil samples. We're looking for biology in the soil as well as, nutrients. But we try to list all those things, and we have a bit of a grid, and then we start to pull together the ecosystem that can tolerate those, or the plants that are supposed to be companions and partners with those key plants that remain on the landscape. We're usually coming in post-development of a home or, some kind of community development or something. So it's either human caused damage or it's shoreline erosion management. So we're sort of trying to work in both the slopes and the horizontal plane. Where they collide usually is where we end up getting called in, because the traditional landscapers don't know what to do once they get to the edge, right? So then we start working from the toe of the slope all the way up and integrating into that space. So we do collide with ornamentals a lot, and we have to figure out how to live together with the nature and the ornamentals together. But it's really quite interesting to watch it change. I've only lived in Nova Scotia since '99, and things have changed quite drastically in this short amount of time. And I'm sure it will, continue to do so. It doesn't seem like we're going to go backwards on the climate change schedule. So we have to figure it out, right? We have to learn how to live with it all.
Can you talk a little bit more about the storm season that you described? Because that sounds very interesting in terms of how, as a business, you need to then retool to accommodate that. And then a little bit, when you're talking about teaching these skills to communities, I think that imparting that idea of a season now as part of their regular life in their backyard, and the skills that you can teach them as part of that.
Yeah, this idea of seasonality and that we're a seasonal business. I don't think that is true anymore, especially in a climate like ours, where it might be different in different regions, of course, across North America. But think about your season and what can you do on the shoulders and in the depth of your winter or your downtime. So we, as a business, my first year, we got our first really big snowstorm in early November, and all of a sudden, I didn't have any money. It was like, what the heck am I going to do now? And right away, that wasn't going to work. I mean, I couldn't get unemployment or any of those programs from the government. So it really was, I just had to make it work. So I started thinking about education and doing community-based education as well as private courses in the evenings or daytime at the community college, at like the garden center, at community halls and things. And so I just started teaching all winter long, and it really helped me to hone all my skills, of course, but then also to say, okay, what do I need to learn more about? Because the greatest way to learn something is to teach it to somebody else. So I started thinking about dormant pruning and teaching that. And then when you're doing dormant pruning, you have to have sharp tools. So we did tool sharpening courses, and, one thing just leads to another. I also did a specialty workshop season a couple years on the horticulture as therapy. And Mitchell Hewson from Guelph, Ontario was my mentor. And so I started working with senior centers and school groups, and really trying to make the deeper connection to nature, bringing little workshops into the classroom or doing talks. I bought the rights to screen the Symphony of Soil videos out of California. And so I started showing those at libraries and, doing it by donation only, or, small fees, things like that. So it really helped me to like broaden my horizons with my business model. And I wanted to mention too, that I was taught sustainability through diversity. So never to focus too tightly that if that thing collapses, you're not left, without anything. So always have 2 or 3 other things on the go, which worked out really well. It meant I was super busy, but it was really fun as well. And having the sustainable business model where you have the 3 Venn circles, the Venn diagram with the 3 circles. So the economy, the environment, and society, and how do they all merge? And, food is a really easy one, and plants is another easy one. Who doesn't love plants and being out in nature and all these things, right? So it was really simple to grow the company in that fashion.
Great. Ashley, would you like to ask your question?
Hi. Yeah, thank you. So this is fascinating. I don't know much or anything about shoreline restoration, but I'm fascinated by it, and I know the need for it. So I'm wondering if you are always coming in, and you touched on this, but as a repair, are you ever able to work with developers or landowners prior to a project development where you can actually instill some of these, preemptive, tactics?
Yeah, great question. Sometimes, it depends on how we enter the process. Sometimes we're being brought in by a landscape architect or an engineer, and then we can get in there pretty quickly and start creating the slopes, the right grades and terracing, and maybe it needs a rock wall, maybe it's in a high energy area that we need to have some disruption of the energy flow with putting some rock structures in there. They can be quite interesting rock walls. They can be lovely and well planted and provide the structure that we need in kind of the background in the foundation, and the plants emerge between the rocks and then drape over them and grow up and through them and such. And so it can be quite beautiful and very savvy as far as a structure that can live on its own and get stronger over time. I think that's really important about the living shoreline to remember, is that if you do it correctly and you provide all the sustenance for life, then those plants just keep generating seed and rootlings, and it just keeps getting stronger over time. So building it right the first time is always best, of course, but often we're coming in as a knee-jerk reaction because erosion happened and people didn't realize or didn't know it was going to happen. And then, they freak out and they call the NGOs, or they call the school, or they call the Department of Environment, and they usually point people back in my direction. So then we start that site process and do the full scale report and all of that. But yeah, we're usually fixing things. Where our company is called Helping Nature Heal. And I often say, helping's our first name, and that's what we do best, right? What do you need? How do you want to get there? And then let's figure out a sustainable fashion that you can make that work. So budgets and timing and financing and all those things come into play. And that's really that social context of being really there's not many machines that can do the work that we're working on these big slopes. We're in rappelling gear with ropes and things, and we're, working our way up and down these slopes, and you can't really put a machine there, so specialized humans are pretty expensive. So scaling jobs to meet people's budgets, especially when it's after a storm and they didn't realize they were going to be in erosion, right? And all of a sudden there's money they have to spend that they hadn't planned for. So trying to scale the project so that it suits the human is really important for us. Storms here, we're sticking out like a thumb on the edge of Canada. We're getting hit by storms all the time. This weekend, it's supposed to be a Category 4 when it hits land, and so things will get destroyed, and people's houses are way too close. And we have a Coastal Protection Act that's coming into play in the next year or two, but that's going to be too late for some people. We have cottages that are 10 feet away from an eroding cliff, and we're getting a Category 4 hurricane this weekend. They're shaking in their boots, and rightfully so. And so that kind of intensity of your own energy and your own hype inside your head of not knowing what's going to happen and how quick is it going to happen, and do I get to live here tomorrow? That's really a scary moment. And it's really quite a humbling experience to help someone through that process. So yeah, it's very interesting for sure. I would highly encourage you to check it out more. And if you have a company that's working near the edge, you should really, take some classes or check us out. Or we do a lot of what we call Shore Up workshops with communities, and we're completely mobile, and we've been traveling all across the Maritimes and some of Ontario and some in Quebec. So wherever you're at, we can figure out a way to get down there and do some hands-on workshops with you.
Thanks a lot.
We have a, oh, did you have another one, Ashley? Okay. We have a question from Spring Ledge Studio. Yes, would you like to ask that directly and unmute? Spring Ledge Studio, do you want to unmute and ask your question, or would you like me to read it? I'll read it. So we are interested in promoting living shorelines, but we are being told that the New York DEC resists living shorelines and will delay an application for years. The only option here is bulkheads, which are fast-tracked. Anything different, even though it has been proven as a better solution, is resisted. Most clients won't wait or pay for a long and often aggravating permit process that may not be approved.
You're right. It's really challenging, but I would implore you to go to the Army Corps of Engineers. They have a mandate right now that they will happily, help you with design processes and offer up all kinds of engineering skill and knowledge and connection to NGOs and funding partners and all kinds of things. Their mandate currently is to approve living shorelines over and above any hardened strategy unless they can prove otherwise, right? So the onus is on the living shoreline does have the first choice with the Army Corps of Engineers, and they supersede any municipality or county. So I would just call your local extension office, and if you don't know who to call, connect with me and I'll hook you up with the right person. But we have some really good connections down there and all along the Eastern Seaboard. There's another organization called Restore America's Estuaries that I would also encourage you to check out, because they are an advocacy program and they do a lot of, like us, like shore workshops and hands-on workshops. And they have a conference coming up in December in New Orleans this year. And check out their website. They have a Living Shorelines Academy as well that also has a lot of contractors and tips and tricks and things that you can do on your own. Yep.
Thank you.
Good. You're welcome.
Great. We're at about 25 after 7. We've gone a little bit over time. Any last minute questions from anybody who's attended today? Anyone? Good.
That's what
Yes, Zach.
All right. So reviewing all the Helping Nature Heal stuff, and once we knew that you were going to be joining with us at this event, there's a lot that you mentioned about like restoring the earth and restoring the soul and that connection, like the human connection to the land, but also how the land has a positive impact on us. I'm wondering how you do landscape design in a way that specifically leaves space for reflection or acceptance of change, or those kinds of like very human emotional experiences, but in the landscape.
That's a great question. We do an awful lot of walking trails made of wood chips. We do a lot of sitting areas. We do a lot of chatting with the clientele about, what's missing in their life. What are they longing for? How do they want to live on this land? How do they want to experience the wind? What do they want to see out the windows? How do they want to share time with their grandchildren? Like these deep kind of emotionally ignited kind of feelings, right? And then we try to embed that into the design. So we have a lot of people who want to just walk aimlessly without anyone telling them where to go, no signs to read. They just want to be able to wander freely in the woods, yet they want to have a trip-free zone that they don't have to worry about stumbling over a root or a stump or something like that. So we do a lot of wood chip trails, and they're 4 to 6 inches deep. They're really soft and squishy, and they're usually lined with logs. So even under a full moon, this trail is sort of glowing, this beautiful wood chips. And you can walk it in your bare feet or your slippers. And so you can just wander aimlessly without thinking, because your feet just go one after another. And we do a lot of like forest bathing with people and just bring them out and breathe and see what you hear and what you sense and smell, and then do more of that. You know, if they catch on to the sweetness of the mint, okay, we'll plant more mint over there. If they're connected to the chattering of the squirrels, then we'll put some nut trees, maybe some hazelnuts or something to bring the squirrels in. So it's the depth of that, and then figuring out a way that they get to experience that more frequently and with more sense of purpose. You know, if they come home from a stressed out day of work or the family situation or whatever it might be, they know that within just steps of leaving the house, that there's a special place there that's created just for them. Could be a log bench or an Adirondack chair or whatever natural kind of thing it is made of, big boulder, mossy rocks, you know, things like that. We do a lot of labyrinths within a forest. So it's not a traditional labyrinth that you would see like in a meadow, but amongst the trees. And it's these trails that just keep going back and forth. It's really quite lovely. We've tried to find good energy systems within the forest structure or within the land. You know, is there a little bubbling brook? Is there a spring that's bubbling up out of the ground? Is there a challenging area that we can develop some really mystical kind of space? Is there a deep wound that needs to be healed? And if there is, then maybe you know, they have a hand in planting that so that as it grows, they feel this sense of honor that they took part in that process. So it's really like contemplative and serving, I guess, is the big word. You know, what is it about them that I need to figure out to get them outside and away from the TV and the tech and all the stuff and really live within that landscape? So they're eating it, they're playing in it, they're resolving spiritual issues or human, you know, sensual issues. Oftentimes people come here because we have a really good pesticide law. And so it's pretty clean here. And they'll come because they have cancer and they can't live where they used to live because it's so toxic to them, or they have environmental illness, or they have mental health issues, and they need to be in a quiet, you know, safe place that they can eat the food they pick off the ground. You know, so the blueberries, the raspberries, the carrots, all these things that are just like fodder as you're walking around the landscape. And trying to incorporate those things. So the ideas of food forest and, you know, the ways of permaculture just emanate through this ecological system that we've rebuilt for them.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Excuse me. Well, thank you so much, Rosemarie. We really appreciate your time. I will be following up, and Zach will be following up with you. Excuse me. We want to let you get on your way this evening. It sounds like you are busy. We want you out there and doing good work. So, thank you so much. We hope to see you again in future and collaborate with you more as ELA. And some of the workshops you described sound really fabulous. So it'd be great to explore some more of those too. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks. And attendees, keep an eye out for a follow-up email that includes an evaluation.
Yes. Thank you. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.